record to cloud. Go ahead, Jasmine. Kick us off.
Hello, good morning. Welcome everyone today. Can you hear me? Because my screen's kind of freezing. Okay, good, great. So welcome everyone to our Advising on Providers CQM Infrastructure. Michael and I are so excited to have you here today. It's been a while since I've seen you all. So I'm excited to be back in your presence. Julie, did you want to do a little introduction for our guest?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I think most of you know me. My name is Julie Saber. I'm the quality coordinator for HIV care services at the Department of State Health Services in Texas. And I'm really excited for today's session. It's going to be great. It's our second session of our part 2 of CQM Leadership Training Series we launched back in 2020. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about going forward was what we introduced to you back in the first series, right? But now we're going to dig deeper and we're going to really build our confidence in advising others on what we learned last time. Some of you may have already known this stuff, but it's always good. Repetition, build your confidence and skills, because we are the leaders of quality in Texas, and we need to really understand what we're talking about when we advise our subrecipients and others. Victoria and some of the others that are subrecipients, I just want to welcome you for joining us, but I did want to point out that these sessions were really designed for AAs, but as you are leaders within your own organization, you are totally welcome to be here. So stay if you like, but it is really focused around advising others, but I know you advise others within your organization. So again, good stuff. So again, I just want to emphasize some of the stuff we're talking about. We're going to really learn how to use those tools in not only advising, but implementing things and teaching others how to implement based on what we find on the stuff we're going to talk about today. So welcome, and I'm excited too. So take it away, Jasmine.
Thank you. Michael, oh, there we go. All right, so just some Zoom helpful hints. Let's remember that if you want to go ahead and exit full screen, because we're probably taking up your entire screen, you can press escape to do that as a quick key. You can always hover over the top right to change any of your view options. Please remember to place yourself on mute until you're ready to chime in, and we highly encourage you to use your cameras. I see a lot of cameras, but if you don't have your camera on, we encourage you to utilize that so we can see your faces if you're comfortable and feel safe space to do that. We also would like you to use your chat room to interact with your colleagues and our team. And remember that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available later for sharing along with the toolkit that you'll see during this meeting. At this time, I would love if you could enter your name, your AA name, and a fun fact about yourself in the chat room. We'll be using your name and your AA name to help sort you into our breakout rooms that we'll fall into later today. Next slide. All right, so once you join, go ahead and remember to rename yourself by adding your AA name to your name. If you look, you should see 3 dots on your screen on your camera for yourself. On those dots, if you click them, there should be an option to rename yourself to include your AA next to your name. This allows us to facilitate assigning you to those breakouts that I just spoke about. And if you'd like to add additional information like preferred pronouns, which we encourage, that would be great, but please do not erase your AA name today. If you get disconnected and rejoin, then sorry, my chat is sitting at my screen. Please rejoin with your AA name and our team will add you back to your breakout room. So a few learning objectives for us today. Michael and I are really going to be talking about naming the activities associated with CQM infrastructure that you will be advising providers to complete. We're going to be identifying the overlap in methods used in CQM infrastructure and achieving together activities so that you can really streamline the work that you all are doing in Texas. We want to explain how to transcribe statewide and regional quality goals and CQM process into your provider organization's CQM processes, and work to describe mechanisms you can use to advise provider organizations on their own CQM infrastructure. We will have a toolkit of items for you all today, including these presentation slides in that recording. We also will be going through your subrecipient OA, and that will be included in your toolkit. And we have the DSHS CQM plan checklist that is very helpful in developing your CQM plan and in your subs developing theirs as well. We will also have a variety of quality progress articles available for your reading and digesting that can be really helpful as you begin to form your minds and continue to form your minds about being quality leaders and helping your subrecipients be quality leaders at their agency homes as well. Next slide. I want to be conscious that Michael was trying to sort you all and that maybe he's not just yet ready.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, good.
I'm still adding some of your names to your AA to your name, and if I made a mistake, definitely correct it. Or you can go ahead and add your own AA affiliation to your name, as Jasmine had outlined. But right now, we're going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes just kind of talking about the subrecipient OA, and we're going to make some connections for you between CQM infrastructure, CQM activities, and achieving together, because of course we know achieving together is the most important soup du jour in terms of our statewide activities, and many of the different QI projects and ongoing CQM activities in place in our AAs are trying to at some level speak to achieving together, USEHE, Create Equity, and many other HIV priority initiatives. So I'd like to first start, of course, like we usually do, by having some polls. And so right now, I'd like to ask you, since our session in March, have you made any change to the guidance for your funded providers regarding their CQM capacity building for relevant provider staff? Whether you say that they have to take certain trainings or review certain videos or be able to speak about this in some way. The second question, since our session in March, have you made any changes to the guidance for your funded providers regarding the CQM program evaluation? Whether it's something that you didn't really have guidance before and now you have some loose guidance, or you had some loose guidance and now you have more formal guidance, that would be great. And of course, for any of these three questions, this is just to see where you're at, and you may not have made any changes, and that's okay too. Let us know that. And finally, thirdly, since our session in March, has your AA considered conducting provider level OAs? Same range of questions. Of course, as you know, we're going to be using the provider level OA as our guidepost for today in terms of our thinking through opportunities that you have as AA leaders to advise them on their CQM programs on the ground. But that's not to say that if you've decided not to do them, that you won't get something out of this as well. So I'm just going to wait a couple of moments to get some more votes in. Don't forget to hit submit on the bottom if you've made your selections. Wonderful. And we're seeing a good range of responses coming in. There is no shame in not being sure. I know that there's plenty of things I'm not sure about, and that's partly the purpose of the call, right? Is to make sure that we provide you with just-in-time resources and supports. So I'll wait just another 3 seconds. All right, so let me share this with you. See where everyone is at. So around a third of you have said that you've enhanced your guidance. Some of you have said that you didn't have formal guidance before. A couple of you really aren't sure, and some of you haven't made any changes, and that's great. As you think about the TA support that's available from our friends at DSHS and also through this webinar series, you know, it's good to think about whether or not it's appropriate to make change, because sometimes it's not. But that's, of course, a dialogue that you can have with your state partners and internally as well. Question 2, we had an even split. Some folks haven't made any changes, some aren't sure, and some are moving into having more formal guidance. And then question 3, most folks were already conducting provider level OAs before March, but now folks are starting to decide to do that, which is great. And a number of folks said that they are not sure also, which again is okay. Hopefully, what the point is to raise your comfort with what is the OA, how is it used, where might it add value to our process as an AA in terms of championing the providers that we fund in our region. So thanks so much for participating in that poll. We'll have other polls later on, as I'm sure that you're accustomed to by now. So here is this big busy slide. I know that I've shown you this several times, and I think this is about the principles of adult learning, right? Here we have from the IHI Sustaining QI white paper in red what we've been looking at in terms of what our role is in the HIV service system within our AA regions. And the purpose of this series, the second part of the series, is to really think about the advice and the support and guidance that you provide to to the folks in your AA region, and those folks are in green. So we're trying to think about how you help to influence what's happening on the ground at these provider agencies. And now you'll notice that the provider agencies are 2 rows. That's because to a certain extent, the provider agency has its own leadership and management, but it also has frontline staff. And there are key nuances here, as we know, in terms of thinking about the ways that we champion and support these 2 levels. We oftentimes will support the provider leaders or the directors of our funded providers by giving them sets of boilerplate templates for policies and procedures. We provide them with funding, we oversee the funding, but we're usually not in the weeds telling them how they have to train and support their providers, or else. We give them guidance and support in the types of resources that might help their frontline providers, acknowledging that it is in fact their role to set the standard work, to monitor their staff, to provide the resources and supports to their own staff. And all we can do kind of as a parent, so to speak, is to kind of hope that they move in the right direction. Now, what these yellow boxes represent are the activities that really are rooted in infrastructure, right? So the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of what make our system what it is in terms of funding expectations, reporting requirements and deadlines, policy and procedure sets, the other types of monitoring and resources that we provide as AAs to our providers. So much about what we're going to be talking about today is thinking about how you guys in red support the directly funded providers in green. On the left side, again, this is more about quality control in terms of thinking about how we meet minimal expectations and standards. And on the right side, this is more about the QI side of things in terms of the way that we lay out that we have expectations on the process or methods that are used, or at least provide a set of process or methods for people to choose from in terms of the way that they go about their QI business. We provide them with tools and resources that they can use when they go on these journeys. And as you know, in the CQM plans, it's really important that we have a place where we outline what these methods are, what the process will be, what types of tools and supports they can expect to have at their level to make sure that they're stepping off on the right foot. So I don't want to go, and belabor the points here, but I think that you can kind of see how that leadership, guidance, and support starts at a high level with you at the AAs and becomes much broader by the time that we get to providers. And of course, as I always like to point out as a person living with HIV myself, that the very bottom row really is all about the patients and how the patients hopefully will receive and be affected by all the great work, support, and services that we're providing in tandem to them. So a quick reminder that there are two levels to the organizational assessment. There's the AA level. Then in Texas, we use the Texas AA organizational assessment that DISHES has adapted from the Part B OA. I know that some of you that are also Part A's may also be using the Part A organizational assessment, but the thing that's really nice about the DISHES adaptation is that it has adjusted the language in the Part B OA to speak to you as a sub-region of the state in terms of thinking about the state as a super region. And we know that Texas is so super big that I wanted to use the word super region, but that is an important nuance. In addition, the DISHES adaptation of the Part B OA collects additional information at the front that really helps the DISHES staff to provide specific resources and support to you as AAs. So for example, it requests more information on your directly funded and supported OAHS providers in terms of what EMR they use, what level of participation they have in things like Create Equity, Achieving Together, and Rapid Start, and a couple of other really important nuances that will help DISHES and the syndicate to organize and arrange different supports to you and for your providers. For example, if there are a dozen Centricity users across the state embedded in our different AAs, perhaps DISHES can convene a Centricity users group that seeks to address all of the questions and concerns people have about a specific system in a way that's collaborative and helps people to rub elbows, with groups outside of the people within their own AA district. And then that's a support that's off of your plate and someone else is taking care of that for you. So I wanted to point out that, at the AA level, there's a lot of important details that DISHES will be able to glean from you. And this is completely different from, the purpose of this part of the series, which would be for you to take the Part C and D OA that's aimed at direct service providers and for you to do that with the providers that you fund. So as opposed to evaluating the system of care, we're in the weeds, looking at each individual provider organization and the way that they conduct their quality business. As opposed to the AAOA that's looking at the way the system promotes quality to drive high outcomes for everybody. This is really about looking at what the individual agency is doing and the mechanics that they have. Similar to the way that the AA level OA will help DISHES to provide resources to you and your sub-recipient funded providers, the Part C and D OA can help you as an AA understand the emerging themes, needs, and trends among your funded providers so that you can provide specific just-in-time TA and resources, or can at least point people to places where they'll be able to gain the support and resources they need to be successful in the end. So just important nuances between these two. There's a specific AA that you use for yourself versus the AA that you'll be using to evaluate folks in the field. And it stands to reason then that since the provider level OA is really looking at what's happening in the provider shops, and the AAOA is looking at the system of care, that the AAOA results will build on the provider OA results. So for those of you who are just starting to do this, I know that you've already been assessed by Julie at least once, but I think multiple times over the years. You'll be able to see how the results of your provider OAs, will end up being reflected in your own administrative agency score, because you represent the sum of the parts in many ways, right, to create the system of care. So I've already mentioned that, you can use the OA to direct time-limited TA or ongoing resources that will help people overall or a subset of people funded in your area. It also allows advisory groups that you may have at the AA level to weigh in on what is happening on the ground, and also to be able to identify and deliver such important, timely resources to your providers. I think another thing that's really important to mention is that apart from dishes providing you with OAs, calls like this are a wonderful opportunity for us to come together. For those of you who have already been doing provider OAs, we can start coming up with some common training sets and action steps based on what needs we see in real time on the ground in the communities we serve. So it's again something that allows us to work together and to stretch our resources more thinly and effectively across the state in ways that will really drive high impact outcomes for our service providers and the patients they serve. And of course, you'll see in the next poll in several minutes that Dishes really wants to be more active in terms of helping you to assess your needs as an AA as they kind of bubble up from the provider, so that they're able to help you to do specific provider level activities that will enrich the regional approach that you have. And this might be related to Achieving Together, but it might be related to anything else as well, right? Because there's always going to be some priority initiative or some topic of the day that really demands our attention. So this is a reminder that the OAs at the AA level and provider level are slightly nuanced. And that makes sense, right? Because one's looking at what's happening in individual provider shops and one's looking at the system of care overall. And one thing that I think is important to highlight here is that the key differences are that in the provider level OA, there's only one question on measurement, analysis, and use of data for QI. And there's also an additional domain at the end, domain I, that looks at organizational integration. And especially thinking about those of you who fund one-stop shops, which I know all of you have multiple one-stop shops in your regions, thinking about how those organizations really think about their quality of care systematically, holistically in terms of the patient journey, and they don't have these individual silos that are related to primary care, mental health, transportation, food, etc. Now, what the stars signify is the areas of the domain that really focus or hone in on CQM infrastructure, which is really what the conversation is for today. So what we have is the quality management section that's looking at the way that our leaders support us, our quality plan, and our quality committee. Capacity building, the way that we encourage new staff and our new staff to come on board and to kind of hit the ground running, but also refresher training for our ongoing staff, or remedial training for folks that don't meet a specific standard or expectation during a process like peer review or other standard employment evaluation. Consumer involvement, very important to think about stakeholder involvement in terms of our CQM infrastructure. Stakeholders in general, but in particular consumers. And again, this is my bias potentially as a person living with HIV, but it is about serving the community. So making sure that we have that community voice at our CQM committee or other tables as needed. Obviously, the evaluation is a really core component to the infrastructure we have in our CQM programs, right? Because the way that we think and talk about the degree to which we've achieved our goals is going to be an important driver of the next year's goal setting, right? And the different revisions that we have to our CQM plan and process. And finally, of course, if you have those organizations that are one-stop shops that are providing both clinical and support services, the organizational integration is a very important in terms of thinking about how we drive quality. As a reminder, Achieving Together is reflected in every single one of these provider level OA domains, really except evaluation. And the reason why evaluation is very important to Achieving Together, but for those of you who are familiar with the organizational assessment, domain F really is very specific about evaluating the CQM program itself and the CQM processes. And as we know, these program processes do touch on things like Achieving Together, but it's a separate evaluation that's robust in its own right. So, we would be thinking about quality management, workforce engagement, consumer involvement, organizational integration as the areas of the organizational assessment that really lend themselves to CQM infrastructure. And of course, if we have good CQM infrastructure, we should be thinking about the ways that we are oriented toward our role in achieving together, even at that provider level, even if it's just a legal services or if it's just a dental, and of course, if it's a one-stop shop. So the last thing I think I'd like to say about this is that if a provider scores well in any of these 5 areas, they're probably going to score well on the OA overall, right? Because communication with stakeholders is a core element embedded in each one of those OA questions. It's like all of them, almost, right? Performance measurement, same thing. Performance measurement and the way that we use our data is core to the success of our quality programs. And so very important and emphasized greatly within the organizational assessment. Facility leadership engagement in CQM and QI, also really important. That basically they're not people who are micromanaging, and they're also not people who are standoffish and kind of put quality in the back corner on the back burner. Demonstrating passion for improving services and care is another important aspect that is covered in several domains. And then the training of stakeholders like your staff, but also people living with HIV. Now, in terms of how you use the organization, we're going to talk about this and walk through several examples, in just a couple of moments. And we're going to be unpacking more examples too in our breakouts. But basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to find the common denominators in the scores of these different elements that help us to develop the CQM plan updates. We can use them also to prioritize next steps based on themes. So if there's an agency that communicates well with stakeholders but is weak in performance measurement, and so kind of shows low scores in A1, A2, C1, D1, E1, then what we would do is say, provider agency, you might want to focus on performance measurement over the next year. And while you have many priorities to address, we would put this at the top, because if you end up knocking it out of the park, you're going to dramatically increase your scores across the organizational assessment. So we're going to be talking through more examples in a couple moments to really demonstrate for you how this works in action. And again, we hope that you enjoy the breakout sessions where we get in the weeds and kind of workshop some of this together among our peers. So I know I went a little bit longer than I had said, but are there any questions or concerns, so far as you go? And you may notice that today's theme in terms of the pictures we're using is famous artists that do self-portraits, because again, I can't emphasize enough for you that the work that we're doing on the ground with our provider CQM infrastructure, we will absolutely see ourselves and our system of care reflected in the work that we do with providers on the ground level with their infrastructure. So we hope you enjoy the artists and kind of like the things that we work our way through. But at this time, any questions or concerns about the provider level OA and its nuances before we move on?
So I did receive a question privately in the chat. So I'll go ahead and throw that out there and see what you think, Michael. I did answer it privately in the chat, but I'd like to get your feedback and view as well, and as well as Jasmine's and everyone else's. So is conducting or completing a provider organizational assessment considered quality assurance, or is it quality management? And should it be reflected in our quality management work plan?
That is such a wonderful and exciting question. So I would say that this is about clinical quality management. The organizational assessment itself really is, per PCN 1502, one of the methods that you as the AA are providing resources and support to the funded providers. Now, you're kind of in the middle, right? You are a subrecipient yourself of DSHS, but the expectation that comes from DSHS as the recipient provider does pass through to your level. And so the need per PCN 1502 for you to provide that significant level of support and resources, this is exactly what that is. Why? Because this isn't just about giving a provider a score and going and walking away for a year. In fact, what we're talking about, and one of the main things we're discussing here, is how you actually provide meaningful support, coaching, and TA resources to your funded providers based on the OA scores. So you're actually working on the ground with your provider organizations to say, you're going to have to go ahead and update your plan. And these are the ways that you can update your plan that will improve your quality program and so enhance your OA scores next year. Jasmine, I don't know if you have any perspectives on this that you'd like to share.
I think you covered it pretty well. Julie, could you tell me the wording of the question again?
Absolutely. So is conducting an organizational assessment on a subrecipient considered quality management, quality assurance, or quality assurance? And should it be included in the work plan?
Yeah, so I would definitely say from my background and work that I've done in the field, that is definitely a quality management function, because it is a very it's something that helps drive technical assistance and training within your quality management program. So the act of doing it can sometimes occur within an administrative function, possibly if you are doing it during an overall site visit or things like that. But the way that we conducted them in Indiana was during individualized technical assistance visits. So it was very much a function of our quality management program. And I would encourage you to list, evaluation of other of your subrecipients or your providers, or you could phrase it maybe as technical assistance visits within your work plan. So you have that planned out for what quarters that'll occur throughout the year and things like that.
Wonderful. Now, something else that you can do is you can crosswalk the organizational assessment, since it is rooted in PCN 1502 and should reflect the things that you already have in the contracts as well. You can share your organizational assessment results with your programmatic teams within your AA. Jasmine's team in Indiana had actually piloted this for us nationally in terms of how to create a monitoring QA component, a compliance component programmatically that's drawn from the OA. So this way we are being very efficient with our providers' time, and we're also not expecting ourselves as CQM staff to be involved in compliance activities, and we're not expecting our program staff to be experts in CQM, right? So there are ways that you can kind of bridge that gap, but the delivery of the OA itself is a CQM practice. And I think Jasmine's suggestions on how to make sure that it's firmly viewed and understood that way at all levels are great ones. All right. So let's come back to our slides, and I'm going to kick it over to Jasmine to do some reviews with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so we're gonna, go ahead.
Jasmine, you should be able to advance your own slide, because I'm going to be kind of, yeah, you should be able to. If not, give me a holler and I'll advance them for you.
How would I do that?
That's right. I am, yeah, never mind. I will advance your slides for you.
Okay.
Brain fart, sorry.
It's okay. So we're just going to be reviewing infrastructure and within the organizational assessment tool. So you can go ahead and so, okay, we're going to go ahead and launch a couple of poll questions. Let me see. I think I can do it, Michael. Oh, you got it. Okay, cool. So looking at our polls or our questions, on the first one we have, since our session in December, have you made changes to the guidance for funded providers regarding their CQM plan? So you can have, yes, we have enhanced our formal guidance to be more specifics. Yes, we did not have formal guidance before, but now we actually do. Or no, we haven't made any changes yet since December. And then looking at our second question, we have, since our session in December, have you made changes to the guidance for funded providers regarding CQM committees? And so then same answers from the first one. Oh, and I'm not sure is also a response for all of them as well. Looks like we have about 30% of the poll in so far. Okay. 2% of the poll in. Who's made changes? Be sure to click submit if you filled out your poll questions so that we can see all of our responses. We're at 57%. I think we can get a few more responses in from a couple more AA representatives out there. All right, we're holding steady. So Michael, we can go ahead and end the poll, and I can do that on my end. It looks like of our respondents, we're pretty evenly split on, we've enhanced guidance that we already had to become more specific, and we haven't really made any changes yet since December. So that's okay. You know, we're hoping that some of this work that we're doing to continue helping your understanding and support you in the work that you do will encourage you all to move forward with supporting your providers in the very near future. And then looking at question number 2, since our session in December, have you made changes to the guidance for funded providers regarding CQM committees? It looks like a lot of you have not yet made those changes, but I'm sure that they are coming down the pipeline as we continue to do the work in this area. But kudos to some of you that have gone ahead and enhanced your formal guidance around your CQM committees. We're going to go ahead and close the poll. Michael, we can do next slide. I want to tell you all that I'm going to blink a whole lot. I was telling them before the call started that my allergies are really bothering me up here in Indiana, and it just really started yesterday. So I'm probably going to blink a whole lot. So I apologize. All right, so revisiting an old example that we've looked at before, right? Here you can see on the right of your screen, we're looking at the OA tool, section A.1, and we're talking about to what extent does senior leadership create an environment that supports a focus on improving the quality of HIV care, right? So remember that on our OA, we're scoring from 0 to 5, and this provider here on the screen received a score of a 1, right? They're checking all the boxes off in a 1, which makes them a 1, but they have a couple of boxes checked in a 2. What is it that we're missing though, right? We can see here that we're missing a data focus in our quality culture. So we have to get that data in and have conversations with our providers around how, what getting the data really looks like. Leaders should be a part of the solution directly or indirectly. So we got to get our leaders really into our quality meetings, right? How does that look like? What is their schedules? What kind of schedule do we need to make for our quality meetings so that they can be more involved? And then looking at supporting some resources for QI activities, we need resources set that are tied to QI activities that show providers what is expected and what is needed, right? So we have to provide support around QI activities and the resources for them in order to get this agency up to a 2. Go to next slide, Michael. Looking at another example, we can see that this is A.2. So we're talking about the extent to that the HIV program has an effective clinical quality management committee, right, to oversee, guide, assess, and improve the quality of HIV services. So we can see here that this agency received a 0 actually. So their quality management committee has not yet been developed or formalized. They got 1 checkbox in a 1 about reviewing data triggered by an event or problem. But in order to get them to a 2, right, we really have to see that their quality committee has plans to hold regular meetings. But even if they're not occurring all the time and they're not yet focusing on data, but remembering that data review processes and the timing of sharing and discussing data is really needed here in order to get that box checked. Their committee maybe hasn't been formalized yet, or has been formalized, but it's representing most institutional disciplines, right? So we want to include all direct service units in CQM and QI planning. So you have a really diverse committee makeup, right? And really have those people from all aspects of the funded organization really feeding into this work that we do to help get buy-in from your teams. And they haven't yet identified roles and responsibilities for each participating individual. So we're identifying the roles, the responsibilities of all staff hands in our QI work and our learning. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, Michael. So causes for provider stagnation, right? There's typically some reasons why providers become stagnant. And some of those things may look like capability, right? They have this lack of technical QI knowledge, maybe a lack of strategic planning or thinking, and then a lack of written and established protocols or documentation, which we all know can be so important in feeling capable in doing this work. They may have stagnation due to capacity. So there just aren't enough hours in a day to do everything. I know we can all feel that way sometimes. There aren't enough hands on deck. Maybe they're a very small team and they just feel like there's just not enough people here to help support this. There isn't enough funding, right? So I hear that a lot, or I used to when I was working for the state, hear that all the time. We just don't have the funding to support the work you want us to do in quality, right? Because they wanted it to be very specific to one program. But how do we really make this the work of many, which is what quality really is, right? And that's the support you can provide around that. I see Julie's hands. Another thing for solution-wise to capacity is like focusing on that creativity, task shifting, and then identifying what actually is possible. Looking at capabilities, some support that you can provide around that into solution focus is on training, sharing tools and resources with your providers, and then having professional peer supports, right? Who is the person that I can go to that is my peer, that is a leader in this area, and what are they leading in, right? And some of those things you'll start to figure out as you do OAs with your providers. You'll really be able to identify who's a leader in this work within committees and who can I point our other providers to for support around how do you form a committee, how do you get consumers involved in your committee, and those sorts of things, right? You want to be able to point to your leaders so that they can all share best practices with one another. Michael, we're going to move to next slide. So you want to be constructive because it's productive. Of course, we want to really listen carefully to our providers' needs and concerns when we're providing technical assistance to them and completing OAs. Conflicting or duplicative requirements based on funding streams may be something that you hear from them. It may be similar, but different performance measures based on the funding stream if they're a dually funded provider like Part A and Part B, and sometimes also Part C. And so we want to, really hear those needs and concerns from them so that you can all take those back and see what work can be done around them. There may also be requirements for or limits to the types of trainings that providers can support. So you want to be flexible in your expectations to allow providers to be creative in ways that can meet multiple demands with fewer activities, right? So they will be able to be able to concentrate and perform well and try to fill the gaps and avoid duplication of work that can be done. It's important to be consistent and be transparent. It's really about this fairness, equity, and parity in the end for all of the work that we do in quality management. And so I'm gonna go ahead, I think Michael's gonna close out the presentation, and then I'm gonna screen share and actually walk you through a few sections of, as soon as I find it, where is it? A few sections of, it's open on my computer, but it's not on my screen. Oh, there we go. A few sections of a OA that was completed at an agency in Indianapolis. Share my screen. Here we go. So we're looking at a OA for Part C and D recipients, which is really helpful, I think, for you all, because this is the OA that you would utilize for your providers, even if they're not Part C, right? Something we developed in Indiana, or that we came to the knowledge of very quickly, was that we couldn't give our subrecipients, in your case, providers, the tool for Part B programs, thinking that they could evaluate their program utilizing this, because it is, as Michael talked about earlier, there's some distinct differences in how evaluation occurs within those tools, though there are many similarities. The Part C and D tool, though, regardless of your part funding, is much more subrecipient or sub-subrecipient facing, and much easier to digest that on that end. So looking over Part A of the OA tool here, right? We're really talking about leadership, our quality management plan, and our committee. So looking at this organization, View Wellness Network, we can see that here the organization was checked for a 2. I'm trying to see if I have all the notes on here. Was checked for a 2 in A.1. So we're talking about senior leadership. So they had to have checked all of the boxes here on this level in order to score that way. And in order to become a 3, right, they may needed to still provide routine leadership to support their quality management program, provide routine and consistent allocation of staff and staff time for QI, and actively engage in QI planning and evaluation, and actively managing, leading quality meetings in order to move to a 3. So in coaching, you really want to talk to your providers about how do you get from where you are to where you want to go, right? When we come back the next year and we want to see improvement, what really takes you from a 2 to a 3? And what support can we provide you around any training needs you could have for that? And looking at 8.2, we're again talking about our quality management committees that oversee, guide, assess, and improve the quality of HIV services. So again, here they were scoring a 2. And in looking at a 3, right, you want to see that there is formally established, your quality committee is formally established and led by a director or a senior level team person. They've implemented a structured process to review data for improvement. They've drafted a work plan, even if they're not actively using it yet, that they at least have a plan. They've defined roles and responsibilities, and those are written in their quality management plan. They review performance data regularly, even that data that is more qualitative, including staff and consumer satisfaction if they're pulling that data. And then discussing QI projects and redirects team as appropriate based on QI progress. And so you want to identify, okay, if the team wants to see next year that they're really working to get a 3, what gaps do they have in being a 3 now? And how can I support them or coach them through getting to be a 3 for next year? Again, in 8.3, we see that they scored a 2. So we're thinking about the same thing, right? Here in 8.3, we're talking about a comprehensive quality plan that is actively utilized to oversee quality improvement activities, which is key here in the scoring. So they do have a plan that's written. It has some of the components, but it's still under review for approval from leadership. It needs some steps for implementation, right? A 3 is really talking about this comprehensive plan. It has all of the minimum requirements that HRSA sees for QI components in a plan. And those components are really laid out in within a toolkit item that you all will receive. That's called the CQM plan checklist. And that can be very helpful in the development of your own CQM plans or in the editing of those, and also for your providers as well. So then at the bottom right, we see these overall comments of how do you become a 3 here? What does that look like? What kind of things do you need to work on in order to get there? And then same thing for 8.3. There maybe fall short in some places, but how do we actually improve in order to up our score for next year? And looking at part B of the OA tool, we're talking about workforce engagement in the QM plan. So in B.1, we're talking about the extent of physicians and other health professionals and staff being routinely engaged in quality improvement activities and providing training to enhance knowledge, skills, and methodology needed to fully implement QI work, right? So is your team really involved in this QI work? What does that look like? We can see here again that B Wellness Network scored a 2, right? So their engagement of core staff in QI, clinical or non-clinical, is underway, and some staff have been trained in QI, but not all of them. And they do include QI meetings that are attended by some designated staff. And in order to move to a 3, we can see that you would need everyone to have at least one training in QI. So what does that look like? How do you suggest in a coaching session that someone would help train their team in QI? Something we used to always tell agencies was in onboarding for new staff, there could be a QM or QI presentation that they have to review, or a recorded presentation, or they have to sit down with the quality manager and receive some training on the basis, the 101 of CQM. They may have staff members that are generally aware of QI activities, but they don't really talk about it too much. In order to score a 3, you would have involvement in QI projects, project selection, and participation in a CQM committee. You would discuss and review QI projects during staff meetings so that the whole team could hear about QI project updates. You define staff roles and responsibilities related to QI. That's done. Check the box. And physicians and staff are aware of quality management plans and priorities for improvement. In order to score a 3, these are the things that they would need. So again, we're thinking, what kind of coaching can we give our providers so that they can check this box during the year? And then reminding them to be kind to themselves. Their programs are going to grow as they implement slowly the work of a QM program. So then down here in the comments, right, we're still talking about how engaged is your staff, and how you can get them more engaged. How can you share webinar or training opportunities for your staff so that they can become engaged in quality management? And then how could they utilize webinars that are already available that maybe you didn't make yourself? So maybe during onboarding, everyone watches, sort of a 101 video from CQII, the Center for Quality Improvement and Innovation. They have webinars on their website through Target HIV, where everyone can kind of get a basis and a grounding in what quality management is.
And real quick, just to jump in, another example of how you can leverage work that's happening across your AAs. I know that some of you have been working for many years to provide this type of technical assistance resource for your subrecipient providers. So I know Dallas anyway has a new set of modules that are about hour-long recorded webinars that you could recommend to people. You could call Angie or Oscar and say, hey, I hear that you have a YouTube channel with this material. Can we send our providers to your YouTube channel? To find opportunities like that. I think Tarrant County also has some training sets that they use that are pretty good as well. So thinking about the resources that you have available to yourself, including your colleagues and your sister AAs, and how you might be able to leverage materials and resources in tandem, and not each of you have to recreate every wheel every time.
Absolutely. And that's another thing, in coaching with your providers, something to think about is what other provider agencies have you already scored in OA that may be scored really well in this area, and how can you direct them to not only other AAs who have trainings, but other provider level teams who are doing really well and can help them out and getting some ideas flowing for improving scores in Part B of the tool. We're going to move down a little further to Part E, which is looking at consumer involvement. I can't stress enough how important this is. And also that this is the thing in Indiana that I would see across the state that people struggled the most with, typically. And so there was a lot of coaching that was needed around how do we involve consumers and how do we connect them with other organizations around the state who are doing this really, really well so that they can try to lend from some of their experiences in order to improve at their own agency home this process. So in E.1, BU Wellness Network actually scored pretty good from an Indiana scoring range in consumer involvement. But we're talking about to what extent are consumers effectively engaged and involved in HIV clinical quality management programs, right? So they scored a 3 here. And that means that consumer involvement includes engagement with consumers to solicit perspectives and experiences related to quality of care. That may be through a year-end survey, through satisfaction surveys at the point of care of service, through other consumer feedback mechanisms like a community action board, to their involvement in the quality management committee and the feedback that they receive there. So it can be a diverse group of activities that are occurring that all merge together to really have that highlight the consumer voice and solicit their perspectives and experiences around their quality of care. And consumer involvement is formally a part of the CQM program through a formal consumer advisory committee, some of those things we talked about, satisfaction surveys, interviews, focus groups. We're really doing these things. We're engaging them, and it's formally a part of the program, right? It's written into the plan of this is how we will do it. It's talked about in your quality management committee meeting minutes, all of those things, right? It is really a part of this program. So we're not only soliciting this feedback, but we're implementing this feedback as a means of improving care for consumers, right? So we're not just asking you to do a survey to do a survey. We really want to see these results so we can identify if there's an improvement need within the services that we're providing, right? And in order to get to a 4, the consumer involvement has to be a part of a formal process for consumers to participate in HIV CQM program activities. They're including a formal consumer advisory committee, all of those things. Everything's it's more formalized collection. And then there's improvement activities, which include 3 or more of the following. Of this list here, there's at least 3 of these things occurring. So they're either sharing performance data around Q activities and discussing quality during consumer advisory board meetings, which can look, different from here to here. Maybe that happens quarterly, maybe that happens monthly. Regardless, the performance data is being shared so that you can collect further feedback about what does this data mean and how do we then implement improvement efforts around these. You're documenting in the HIV quality management plan. There's membership on your internal team or committee. There's training on quality management principles or methodologies. There may be engagement to make recommendations based on performance data results. And there may be increasing documentation of recommendations by consumers to implement QI projects, right? And then this information is gathered through the above noted activities. It's actually documented and then it's implemented to be utilized to improve quality of care, right? That's the part that makes scoring a 4 here a little more difficult, but those types of activities would need to occur, and you can always provide coaching on how do we do this, and again, who do we point to who is stellar in this work so that you can have further support outside of the training and assistance that you all can provide your providers.
So Jasmine, I'm just looking at the time here, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for our breakouts. But I think this has been really good to kind of show folks how you take the scores themselves and the check boxes, and that's how you make your guidance and your coaching. And I think that you can see as well through just these examples the level of overlap, right? The performance measurement came up time and again. Training came up time and again. Leadership involvement came up time and again, right? So I think another important nuance you can see here regarding the organizational assessment and how it's set up, as Jasmine just emphasized, 3 is the center of the bell curve. 3 is really what we're trying to aim for. and not all agencies will find it appropriate or necessary to get to a 4 or 5. You know, you can see that the hurdle gets a lot higher for 4 and 5. And so you get to decide for yourselves and with your recipient provider agencies, what's most appropriate for them at any given time. For the most part, it's safe to say that you can help to haul people up to a 3. But once you get beyond that, it's kind of like the circus with the rings on fire, and you really have to have conversations about what's going to work best.
Exactly. I would always tell agencies, you know, some of the even most robust programs across the country don't always score 4s and 5s in certain areas on the tool. And so we really want to aim for continuous improvement over the goal is to be a 5. And I can see that Julie stated that, you know, you all are working on a goal to get everyone up to a 3 in all of these areas and identify opportunities for improvement and then pick 1 or 2 things to start improving. And that's a really good goal and idea to have so that improvement is continuous but gradual, and we're being kind to ourselves and fair about the capacity that we have.
Now, before we break into our breakout rooms, Barclay Hendricks here is wondering, do we have any questions or concerns about the presentation that and the examples that we just crossed? I see some chats in the chat room here. Julie is providing more insight into our goals in the Texas program. But any questions or concerns before we go into the breakouts? All right. So let's take a deeper dive and break out. I've gone ahead and tagged everybody. I have the breakout room set up. In just a moment, you're going to be given a pop-up box that allows you to join a breakout room if you are in breakout 1. For those of you who are in breakout 2, you're going to be in the main room with me. And so that'll include StarCare and STDC as the Part B alone AAs. The Part B/Part A AAs will be with Jasmine in breakout group 1. And we're going to be talking through a couple more examples and also just kind of finding some support for each other. So I am just gonna go ahead and.
Real quick, Michael and Jasmine, we did have a question from Angie in Dallas.
Hi, Angie. Thank you so much for bringing that forward, Julie. And which finding result goes under the QM plan as annual quality goals? Wonderful question. When it comes to quality goals, our federal partners really want us to focus on clinical goals because so much of the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program is on clinical care. So our clinical quality goals can focus on things like retention and viral suppression, linkage to care, addressing disparities in care. Now, when we're thinking about the stuff that makes our CQM program what it is, those are operational goals. I like to include both types of goals and I specify between the two in my QM plan. This is really helpful for my stakeholders to understand that, of course, we're focused on clinical care, duh. But at the same time, in order to advance the mark with clinical care, we must also address these operational issues. In other words, we don't have the right stakeholders at our tables. How are we going to advance the clinical care if we don't have the right stakeholders at our tables? So an operational goal based on, I think it was A2 on the CQM committee would be that we need to make sure that we have the right stakeholders at the table. And you can make a SMART goal thinking about making sure that reflected communities are present in, target or focus communities are present in our CQM committee discussions and otherwise by X date. You can become more specific as needed, but that's an example of how I parse out these two things. Operational goals, you're likely going to end up seeing bubble right out of the OA itself, and clinical goals that are, of course, rooted in the HIV care continuum and our federal partners' expectations for clinical care. Did that help? And any other questions on this? Because that's a really important nuance, and I think a place where people feel stuck sometimes.
Also, Christy, it was my fault. I was thinking that Part A might be here from Austin, so I thought you guys would want to be in the same group, but I don't see anybody from Part A Austin. So BV Cog, if it's not too late, would prefer to be in breakout 2 with the other Part B onlys, because they have more in common.
Sure.
Michael had you there to begin with, and then I asked him to move you. But just like Michael said, I think the goals can be you can synthesize the results of the OA and come up with big, broad goals, and then bring them down into performance measure goals. So depending on what you want to work on and your organization and what's priority would be, and then using the OA itself in the QM plan is I include that as my process of evaluation. So that's where it goes on our QM plan, and then the results of it form next year's goals in, partly, not completely, but.
Exactly. You must bring cookies, Bob says. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. Just click join when the pop-up comes. And again, if you're in breakout 2, you're going to stay in the main room here with me. All right, so I'm seeing people get sucked away into their breakout room. And the individual named Sir Thomas, I wasn't sure what AA you were with. So if you are in the wrong room, give a hi sign and I'll punch you over to the other room. But for those of you who are here with us in the Part B only group, welcome. And what I'd like to do is just kind of work our way through some examples that we have here.
So that's Susan Renee Thomas from Tarrant. So she does belong in the other group with
yes.
party.
Hi, Michael. I'm sorry. I saw your chat and responded too late. So my apologies.
Hey, no worries. Let me see if I can just punch you over. I sure can.
Punch me out.
There you go.
Bye.
Bye. All right, my friends. So this is an open conversation. And what we'd like to do is to see what advice you would give to a provider that has this score. What next steps would you recommend that they take? And you can also, if you've had an experience where you've had some of you may have done OAs before, if you've had a provider that's been in this situation, what's worked well and what's not worked well. So I'm just going to leave a moment for us to look at what's on the slide here, and then we can see what you think. And I might have Tiffany Shepard in the wrong room too. Sorry about that. There we go.
And Jennings is also from Tarrant.
Don't see Jennings.
Jennings Stone.
They didn't. Yeah, they're supposed to be, but they didn't click join.
Oh, okay. So maybe they have to go to the restroom or something. Sorry. Okay.
Take your calls.
I'll just be listening. Julie, thank you.
Okay.
Great. All right. So in terms of thinking about this situation, what advice would we have for a provider that has this score? You'd start with data collection schedule. What data needs to be collected? What data are you watching, etc. And I think, yes, I think that makes a lot of sense, because what you're trying to do is to basically softly assess, what process do we have? Is there a structure, right? Because we know our agencies are like, well, my process is to make sure that I keep you happy. But that's not necessarily, going to work, right? Because you're not the only funder for the agency. The agencies may have other pots of funding too, in terms of thinking about, for our specific groups, we might not have other parts funding, maybe a C, maybe a D, but we're likely to end up running into folks who are funded by SPINS or funded by the CDC. to think about how all of this kind of comes together in a complex. So, along that line too, thinking about the defined roles and responsibilities that we have in our QM plan, it's about who's at the table. What table do we have? Who's at the table? And how do we make sure that we keep people interested in being at that table, right? Because we're not the CEO of our organizations. And, even when we're advising people on the ground at provider agencies, they're not the CEOs of their organizations. So it's not like they can force people. They need to find ways to call people in or find ways to compel people to join. So finding something that gives them skin in the game, whether it is you're responsible for bringing your data and talking about it as it relates to your unit of service or program, whether it be linkage or housing or food. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was just going to say, to get people in the game every so often, you need to have and I do this with my AA people or my providers is I ask them, what's the big problem? What's your big problem that you see? Because we have we have indicators that we collect data on every month and every quarter and even every year, but all that came from, it can be kind of shotgun if you don't have some kind of focus for what the problem is.
Yeah.
It's just that simple for me. You start with them because they're the ones that's doing it. In the AA, we don't actually do anything except, like administer and shake a stick or a carrot every now and then, do a little training. That's about it. But the providers are actually out there providing care.
Yeah. And I like this because, what I had said in the first section was the AA level OA builds on the provider level OA. So that same question that you use for your funded providers overall, you could also encourage your providers to think about all of the departments and units within their organization and doing the same process. You might find that people who are working in the case management department have a whole different understanding of the patients and what the challenges are versus the medical folks, right? Or versus the people who do HIV testing and linkage to care. So it's a really great process to think about what do I do as the AA that works to engage the providers, and is there any correlation between that and what a provider leader can do in their organization to help bring all of the rest of their teams under the umbrella? That's great. And I think, that really is the golden answer for this one regarding having a 3 in the quality committee, making sure that everyone has a role that's tied to their specific function within the organization, and that they're able to feel comfortable talking about data and feel comfortable about talking to the next steps that the data point to. So here's another one in terms of thinking about a group that's already a 3 and that they might want to be reaching further. They're very data and evaluation oriented and they want a 4. What advice would you give to this provider to help encourage them to take that next step and become a 4? So something I saw in the chat room, Stephen responded to Bob and saying like, oop, better be careful what you ask for, because if you ask people what's the problem, you might end up getting the laundry list or the litany of things that are outside the locus of our control, and I think that is really important to keep in mind, that there are things in our control and things out of our control, and trying to just always have our dustpan and little sweeper ready to kind of sweep us back into places that are within our locus of control. But the evaluation process here actually helps us to identify possibilities for what we can do with those things that are outside of our control, right? Because our clients, think about our trans clients. We're the Ryan White program. We're interested in retention in HIV care and viral suppression. We're interested in avoiding unnecessary morbidity and mortality related to HIV disease. But from a trans person's standpoint, they're like, I want to live, but what's really good? Living in a body that feels like mine, living in a body that reflects who I am. And so as such, you know, the trans community is going to say, I'm not really interested in exploring some of these other issues with you until we get to the point that I can feel like I am discrimination and stigma free, and that I am moving in the direction of having a body that resonates and reflects who I am as a person. So embedded in that are two things, something that is in your locus of control and something that's outside of your locus of control. And so what you can do then is to encourage providers to really think about how they take a fine-tooth comb and parse these things out, and they can identify new non-traditional partners. For me, that's the purpose of non-traditional partners. What are all the things that are weighing me down as a program or a system that are the things outside of my locus of control, so that I can find folks that it really is more in their, it's their bailiwick, it's in their control. And I can then demonstrate to my stakeholders, I have heard you, and I am moving in the direction that I think you would like us to take. But I'm also doing things judiciously and productively and appropriately, so that I can make sure that I serve you the best I can. You know, I'm sure that for any of us that have been in a situation where we're unhappy about something and someone comes back and says, I get it, I see you, and I hear you, it really goes a long way to making us feel better. And since we're all human beings, it stands to reason that a similar approach would really make a difference for others as well.
I just wanted to say that when I read Stephen's question on chat, I thought he was asking what my problems are. And so I've moved to the sofa here and cleaned off, you know, that, and I'm about to unload on him, but I'll do that in the chat, discuss all my personal issues. Now, actually, I just wanted to say, when I asked the question, what's the biggest problem? I don't really have any goals in mind, or I don't want to hear a certain thing. I really want to know, and if it's outside of my control, that's a big issue that maybe we can work on. Because there's, I mean, if they say, I hate the president, you know, I want the other party to win, I don't know if I can work on that. But that tells me that they have, that's occupying a large part of their mindset.
Yeah.
So even training on, or talking to, or, talking about focusing on some data area might help with the overall thing, because maybe they think about that problem less when they're at work. So I don't hear everything. And so it can get, exhaustive in the sense of, you know, I can write out 3 or 4 pages of them saying this, that, and the other thing, but I think it's still important to hear all that. So that's all.
Yeah, people need to be seen and heard. And then you find folks like in Dallas, there's the Black Policy, Southern Black Policy and Advocacy Network. There's AIDS United. There's a whole bunch of different organizations that will help people to build up their capacity to do the kind of advocacy that we're specifically barred from doing. Because that's the other thing that's important too. There are things that we're allowed to do and things that we're not allowed to do also. And that doesn't, just because we're not allowed to do it doesn't mean we can't ask about it and understand and identify what some of these issues are. So the last thing that I think that's really important here is that if we're going to end up having an evaluation, we need to make sure that we're reviewing the results of the evaluation. And I think that that's the important nuance of moving from a 3 to a 4 with regard to evaluation, is that what we're doing is we have a roadmap, and then we're pulling the roadmap up. And in a way, if you do a lot of strategic planning and kind of program building, what this looks like basically is that the evaluation results become part of your work plan, right? And that's how you identify operational annual quality goals. Is that you've come from your evaluation and you've plopped it somewhere else, so it stays in the front of people's eyes and minds, and they're able to think and talk about this as we move. And then taking it to the next step in terms of identifying, just because we have a process, there's a merry-go-round that we're all on, right? With regard to annual cycles and all of that. But that's not to say that we can't make improvements or changes to that merry-go-round. You know, so in terms of identifying that last checkbox is used to determine new performance measures based on new priorities. This is going to happen all the time. The state of the science is always changing. The state of the body politic and socioeconomics is always changing. So we're always going to need to be able to think about what is done and can be retired or kind of archived and what's new so that we can be judicious and practical and we're not having never-ending QI projects, never-ending stories, and we can send Falcor home.
So I know for these three administrative agencies, they each have subrecipients that are vastly far apart from each other. STDC has Corpus Christi and then the Valley, which is kind of close, but not really, right? 100 miles away or something. And then the, Star Care has Lubbock and El Paso, which is way far, both on the west side of Texas, but very different. And then BBCOG has places all over the place. So I could see how, you know, having one goal for, you know, we heard yesterday on another meeting that one size doesn't fit all. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, or how you can synthesize the work to meet the different areas? Erica or Christy?
Hello, hi everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. Sometimes I have
Yes.
problems with the mic. For us, it is really different because the areas are so unique, right? Everybody has their own situations. So sometimes it's hard for us to get together and decide on what is, if we're working on a quality improvement project, for example, what is going to be working for all the different agencies, the different providers. But we do go back to our data and see where is it that we really need to work for every single one of them as a unit. And then we also, so we make plans, we base ourselves on our monitoring results, on our data that we gather, but also we do it on an individual basis, depending on their specific situations. But it is hard sometimes to put ourselves together because it's, they're very different. We're very different. Living in the South and then what it is Laredo and then the Valley and then Corpus, it's a very different situation. But we do really well. I mean, we put, what is it that we are, all of us, lacking, and we work together on it.
I like that, Erica. So you have one shared goal that you guys agree on, and then you could have unique activities for each of the areas based on the needs of that region. That's wonderful.
So I think what we're focusing on, and I've seen this especially working on like collaborative, we can't even agree on an age group, much less an intervention. But basically, what our bigger intervention is we're working on improving viral suppression, and we're getting there in different ways. That we all started working on the same age group, and that's not the same anymore. But it's essentially we're all working on improving viral suppression. So however we get there is how we get there.
And I think that's okay, because that's what you need to do, right? Different places have different needs. And so I love how you've looked at your data, and I think that's how you guys decided on different age groups.
Yep.
Because some areas were farther from viral suppression at this group and some were, so.
And also we did the fishbone diagram, and people realized, okay, so this is actually what our problem is. And didn't realize that before we drilled it down. So that was super useful.
Great. And so we're going to have folks kind of coming back in because I just ended the breakout rooms. But in terms of thinking about the next step with Achieving Together, you know, it's great that we have unifying principles like the HIV care continuum to unite us. But then we also have, you know, in the Texas environment, we have status neutral approaches. We have, you know, approaches that help us to identify, root out, eliminate stigma, you know, and other things that are embedded within the Achieving Together model too, that go beyond just the care continuum, but allow us to really think in a multifactorial way about what it is that we're trying to do and how we complement each other or not, you know. So that is really good. Now, I think we pretty much have everyone back in the room. So I wanted to know, based on our conversation, in the 2 breakout rooms, did anyone have any aha moments or any thoughts? I know that the other group was quite large. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to share?
I think just one major point that our small group went over was when we really analyzed and really broke it down, it really came down to time management, and 2, trying to get those easy wins, identifying those easy wins.
That's right. So important, right? Because a lot of us already feel like we're under siege and that there's so many demands on us at all times. And then when we think about our providers, and I know some of our providers have joined us today, I saw Joni giving a healthy, hearty head nod there. You know, it definitely like amplifies. So when we can look at a complicated problem and help people to break it into bite-sized pieces, I mean, that's how you eat the elephant, right? One bite at a time. Great point. All right, so we are just a couple of minutes before the end of our session. I don't know if there's any kind of high-level overall questions that folks have about the provider level OA, or how putting it into practice, or expectations, any of that.
I think we just need to start doing them with our providers. And it's on the list, and there's so many other things on the list, and that just seems to keep moving down the list. But at some point, it's going to be on the list.
Yeah. So, you know, an exciting thing, I hope it's okay to share, Julie, but something that we had been discussing and potentially will bring forward for future sessions, like probably in 2022, like, woo, you know, is to have an opportunity to work as AAs on actual case studies. In order to validate this tool, the National Quality Center worked with JSI in Boston to create case studies that really help to kind of reflect what a transcript of an interview would look like. It's not a lengthy full process, but it's enough, I think, to give you a sense of with a flavor, and then also the accompanying documents that go along with the little interview thing. That way you really kind of get the opportunity to interact with the subject matter in a safe space, and then we can discuss and unpack like the merit of different scores and kind of what advice and coaching we would provide to providers. And in a way, then it creates a collaborative learning environment where we can unpack the OA ourselves in a bite-sized way. So I hope it's okay, Julie, to share that. I was so excited.
Absolutely. So I hope you all feel a little more comfortable using this tool. And I hope those of you who said no, you weren't using it or haven't made any changes since we started, think again, and maybe, you know, some of this can really be helpful to your program. Does anybody feel like they understand it better than they did before? Or, you know, was this a positive experience for you? Hopefully.
Bad. As you can see, we have 2 more sessions. We have one in September where we're going to be doing a similar exercise, but on the performance measurement specific aspects. So we're going to be dusting off, you know, some more of our little OA examples and talking through what that looks like with another large example like the one that Jasmine had walked through. And then in November, we'll be doing, again, the same process, but for the QI specific pieces. This will hopefully allow us to wear into this and to think about infrastructure, the performance measurement, and QI as the 3 components of clinical quality management, and to just kind of increase our comfort all around with that. And just a reminder, we have a number of different resources available to you. And I think that in terms of the Quality Academy, we raised that a couple of times. It was right in the comments for the organizational assessment that Jasmine had shared. But it's really important to remember that, you know, Julie and her team and Jesse and his team are available as key resources for you. And it's really exciting that there's a statewide Rapid Start Institute that's now in place too, where we're thinking about the clinical and operational aspects of that program and how it can feed into your quality activities. And with that, I would like to just invite you all to participate in our evaluation poll before we end. I'll launch that. And again, we wind up making our presentations based on your feedback. So please be honest and forthright in terms of how you feel this meeting went, in terms of it meeting your expectations, the meeting length, the opportunities to share, and the amount of content. We're trying to avoid feeding you from a fire hose. So let us know if we met that mark. Great. And if you have completed the evaluation, thank you so much for joining us today. As usual, we're going to be formatting this recording and putting it, making it available through the Dishes website, and also the toolkit will be emailed out to everyone who registered for this meeting as well. So all of you had to register to be here. So you might end up with some colleagues who also get our materials, and that will be great in our book. So I don't know, Julie, Jasmine, any closing words before we end today?
It was a pleasure to be with you all again today, and I will see you back in November. So I look forward to that.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Great. I just want to say thank you all again for joining us today and spending some time with us as we learn more about QM and build our leadership skills. And I look forward to seeing you at our next session, and have a great week. I know I learn something every time.
I
Thank
learned from
you all.
working with you guys too. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.